This month of Elul requires a lot of inner work. This is the time for turning to teshuvah, a time of reflection, to see ourselves more clearly, to correct our ways, to ask for forgiveness, to chart a path for a way forward to our finest selves. Teshuvah and tefillah, prayer, here we are. One of the most powerful tools in the toolkit of tending to the inner self is tefillah, is prayer, cultivating the spirit, the neshama that has been given to us, cultivating a relationship with the divine. And then there is teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah. Also, during the month of Elul, we are as generous as we can be. Not only with our words and the forgiveness that we grant to those who seek it, but also generosity that is a kind of self-sacrifice with our hard-earned dollars. That is a great way of making change in the world and also making change within. So it's a time where we confront a lot of fears. And the tradition is honest in saying there's a lot of scary stuff in this lifetime that we have to face. There's a lot of scary stuff in this world that we may have to confront. And throughout the month of Elul, and then throughout the 10 days of repentance, while we may approach them with some measure of trepidation, by the time we get to Ne'ilah, by the time we're singing that nigun, we have replaced fear with faith. Faith in ourselves, faith in our people, faith in humanity, and faith in God, faith in the future, faith in believing that life is worth living. At the end of the holiday, we see that the gates are open, that everything seems possible, and everywhere is promise. So if you have been coming to our weekday morning services, you will take up the practice, the Jewish custom, of reading Psalm number 27 each morning throughout the month of Elul. But it hasn't been built into our Shabbat practice, even though, according to tradition, we can turn to this psalm on Shabbat. So let's have a look together on page 404 of our prayer book. And I'd like to walk you through it. There are a number of sections and scene changes where the psalmist confronts some of the hardest things that can be thrown our way in life. And we see how the psalmist moves from fear to faith. Page 404. And when we come to the italicized parts, that's when you'll please join me. This is a psalm attributed to none other than King David. The eternal God is my light and my rescue. Whom shall I fear? The eternal is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers close in to consume me, it is they, my enemies and foes, who stumble and fall. Should an army besiege me, my heart would not fear. Should war break out against me, still I would be confident. One thing I ask of the Eternal One, only this do I seek, to live in the house of the Eternal all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Eternal and worship in the temple. For God will shelter me on the day of trouble. God will hide me under the cover of God's tent, will set me high upon a rock. Now my head is high above my enemies who surround me. Will offer sacrifice in God's tent with shouts of joy. I will sing and chant praises to the Eternal. Adonai, hear my voice when I call. Be gracious to me and answer me. On your behalf, my heart recalls, seek my face. Your face, Adonai, shall I seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not reject or forsake me, God, my rescuer. Were my father and my mother to forsake me, the Eternal would take me in. Teach me your way, Adonai, and lead me on a level path because of my oppressors. Do not abandon me to the will of my foes, for false witnesses have risen against me, breathing violence. Were it not for my faith that I shall see the Eternal's goodness in the land of the living. Hope in the eternal God. Be strong and of good courage. Hope in the eternal God. And on weekday mornings, this psalm is then followed by Tekiah, by the sound of the shofar, a kind of triumphant and courageous sound. So let's go back now and break it down a little bit, a short text study for this Shabbat during the month of Elul. Back to the first section on page 404, we can hear the fear and anxiety in the voice of the psalmist. The scene is he's preparing for battle, and he has every reason to be afraid because his enemies are real. And maybe some of his enemies are only imagined, but still instill fear in him. And he looks for confidence and faith in the midst of war when he will be on the defensive. He wants to be able to stand tall, and he calls on God for strength. The second section, where you came in on the italics, this line always makes me laugh. Achat sha'alti. I only ask for one thing. And then he goes on to ask for many things. But what's the one thing that he identifies? To live in the house of the Eternal. Only this do I seek. To be able to behold the beauty of the temple that once stood in Jerusalem. So that's the scene on the Temple Mount, right, where everything is glory, everything is God's grandeur. And then at the top of 405, there's a scene switch, if you can imagine, like in a movie. There's a new scene, and now he's on the battlefield. And even there, he does his best to make a makeshift temple. He calls it God's tent. And there he makes sacrifices and offers up prayer as best he can, even though he is in the midst of this war. He makes room for the sacred. And then the fourth section describes something that is a kind of existential loneliness. The psalmist is seeking out spiritual courage. And I think I'm going to talk about this in one way or another during the high holidays, about a kind of existential loneliness that many Jews are feeling these days throughout the diaspora, certainly here in Canada, and certainly in Israel. And the psalmist asks God to stay close, to hold me close, don't let me be lonely. There's a heartbreaking verse towards the bottom of page 405, were my father and my mother to forsake me, the Eternal will take me in, even if I'm rejected by those who are responsible for protecting me. If they leave me vulnerable and exposed, God will be with me. And then when we turn to page 406, we find the kind of language that in most years I never could relate to, but this year I can. The psalmist says, do not abandon me to the will of my foes or false witnesses who have risen against me. We are often misunderstood, misrepresented today, and the word that the psalmist uses for the kind of violence that is raging against him is none other than the Hebrew word Hamas. If you see that in the Hebrew, you can appreciate, I think the terrorist organization, Hamas, I think it's an acronym of 3 Arabic words and has nothing to do with the biblical language of violence here. But certainly in the ears of Israelis, of Hebrew-speaking Israelis, this connection is not lost on them. And then the concluding verses. So just next we have the word lulei, which is a beautiful Hebrew word. I could give a whole sermon just on the word lulei. The 4 letters of lulei, lamed, vav, lamed, aleph, are the same 4 letters as the month of Elul. So that's a beautiful connection between this psalm and the month we're in. Were it not, think of how you might finish a sentence that ends with, were it not. But here, the psalmist says, were it not for my faith that I shall see the Eternal's goodness in the land of the living. And then his voice trails off. It's like he can't bear to say it. He can't bear to think it, because his faith in God's goodness is what he is holding onto literally for dear life. And so when his voice cracks, he takes a deep breath, and he instead ends with these words, Kaveh et Adonai, hope in the eternal. And you can see the echo of many calls throughout the Bible, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and of good courage. And then he repeats again, Kaveh el Adonai, hope in the eternal. So I want to say one more word about this word kaveh. This hope that the psalmist is seeking is not optimism. There's a big difference between hope and optimism. This kind of hope resembles faith. Faith in the future, faith in oneself, faith in God's goodness, faith that humanity can find its way. So why does he say Kaveh el Adonai? We translate it here as hope in the eternal. But literally, Kaveh el means hope to Adonai. Why to? Because the root of the word tikva, the noun hope, is built on the word kav, which is a line. So imagine we are throwing hope to God. We're throwing a line to God. Every day throughout the month of Elul and into the holy days, we're throwing a line to God so that God can catch it and then pull us up from whatever low place we are in. God can literally lift us up from a fallen place, no matter how dark or how lonely. So I hope you'll turn to Psalm 27, and that when you read it over and over again daily, you'll find new insight into what it is to be human, and new insight into what this month of Elul can bring for us and these coming holidays. How can we prepare for the new year on the horizon?